Hi, this is Steve Nash, and welcome to my weekly update. Nice and hot and sunny again, isn't it? And we're not even halfway through July yet, therefore not even halfway through summer, so probably a lot more of this to come. But hey, we shouldn't moan, should we? When you look at over the last century or so, there are certain standout organisations that have seen unbelievable success. Ford, General Motors, Volkswagen Group, many. And there are many you could mention. But who would have thought, Ford and General Motors both ended up in Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection after the 2008 crash. I won't digress into all the reasons why that was. But I mean, these were absolute leviathans. I mean, they're still huge players. But as I say, sustaining the sort of success that they had in the 60s and the 70s, they could only dream of at that point in time. And I think that Volkswagen Group, it's in the news now, isn't it, that Volkswagen Group are looking at cutting 100,000 jobs and closing factories. I mean, that's something that would just be utterly unheard of just a little while ago, just a few years ago, before the current paradigm shift that we're going through. I mean, if you've ever been to Wolfsburg, where Volkswagen are based in Germany, I mean, it's a humongous operation. It's got its own station on the main line, on the main train line. I mean, look, it's a brilliant company with a brilliant heritage, but they've hit problems. I think from 2016 to 2019, Volkswagen Group were the biggest car manufacturer in the world. Now they ceded that position back to Toyota, and the gap between the two has sort of widened. Toyota hit something like close to 11.5 million cars last year, and Volkswagen Group was 8-point-something million. But look, I mean, the real story here, of course, is the emergence of the Chinese groups, the Chinese industrial conglomerates like, BYD, SAIC, Geely, Chery, who are all creeping into the top 10. And you wouldn't bet your house on any of those not taking number one spot at some point in time. It begs, what do you have to do in these situations where legacy is not necessarily a benefit? It's not, legacy is only really a benefit when people can see that the heritage you have is all about reinvention. I look behind me here. You might see there's a model car there. It's a model of a racing version of a BMW 328, which was a tremendously successful car. It's a rather unique sort of coupe version that was raced in the 1930s. And I always used to say to new people joining BMW when I was there that, the important thing about BMW was that they didn't rest on their laurels. They didn't sort of say, well, look, we've done it, because otherwise they'd still be making this, wouldn't they? I mean, they're not unique in this, but they use their heritage as a springboard, not as a millstone. That's the most important thing. They didn't rest on their laurels. They said, this is what made us great. This is what we have to do to continue being great at what we do. I think they've largely, BMW, like many others, have been through its hard times. I mean, if you know the history, you'll know that after the war, they went back to making cars like this. Well, not exactly like that, but later versions, some lovely sports cars and sports saloons, which nobody had the money to buy. And it virtually bankrupted them, and making bubble cars for a while before they were rescued by Herbert Quandt, who had a shareholders meeting, and they went from strength to strength from that time onwards. But, linear growth that goes on forever is absurdly hard to achieve, isn't it? And, every car company has hit its blips. I think the biggest challenge now, I remember back in the early 2000s when the Chinese market really emerged strongly. It was sort of late 90s, I suppose, when you really started to see the emergence of this sort of burgeoning middle class with money in China. And it was fantastic news for the car industry, or for a lot of the car industry, particularly the premium car manufacturers, but not exclusively premium car manufacturers back at that time. Because I remember, again, and I mean, there'll be plenty of stories like this around the automotive industry, but there were definite talks at BMW at the time about canning the V12 and V8 engines and having instead a range of different displacement versions of the six-cylinder engine with different numbers of turbos and so on. And that all changed because of China, because when the Chinese market really opened up, the Chinese customers didn't want a six-cylinder if they could have an eight-cylinder. They didn't want an eight-cylinder if they could have a 12-cylinder. They wanted the best of everything. They wanted long wheelbase. We made special versions. They still do in China. If you've seen my interview with the former CEO of BMW China, Sean Green, you'll know Sean talks about the fact the Chinese want long wheelbase versions of everything. And why not? That they're willing to pay for it. But I mean, that completely changed a strategy that might have been. And BMW, like all the other manufacturers that were making hay while the sun shone in China, were delighted to give the Chinese customers what they wanted. And, that was great news for a period of time. Of course, the Chinese are pretty savvy, aren't they? I mean, you weren't allowed to sell cars in China. You aren't allowed to sell cars in China unless you partner with a local company. So there's amount of knowledge and technology transfer that comes with that. So the things that they were not terribly knowledgeable about, I mean, they were very smart. I've talked about this before, haven't I? About how they, right under our noses through their Belt and Road scheme, they went around to developing countries and said, we'll build you your hospitals and your airports and your railways and things in return for your raw materials. And lo and behold, before anybody really fully understood how important electrification could be in cars, they already had cornered most of the raw materials. But what they didn't have back in the early 2000s was the knowledge about the other elements of the car, the running gear, the handling, the suspension setup, all those kind of technical elements that the legacy manufacturers were exceptionally good at. But they were able to learn. And when you put those two things together with the move to electrification, it's put them in an incredibly strong position. And, let's be honest, the Chinese cars we're seeing, and believe me, lots of the ones we haven't seen yet, are not cheap and cheerful cars. They're anything but. They're extremely well engineered, and they deserve their place in a strong market. The other thing is, look, I mean, China's home market is a massive engine for growth and development. It peaked last year, so hit its highest level ever with passenger cars. I mean, the total market was something like 34.5 million vehicles. The passenger car element was 29.5 million. 29.5 million cars. I mean, that's humongous. And there's too many manufacturers there. And again, I've talked about that in previous weekly updates. It's widely believed that there'll be a fair bit of consolidation over the next number of years, certainly sort of 2030 and beyond. But nevertheless, the growth into that kind of volume, which is now very much dominated by the locally produced brands, with all of the Western brands suffering significant reductions in volumes, which is causing other problems, which I'll come on to. They've learned incredibly quickly, and their ability to develop and engineer new cars in record times, within a couple of years, 20 months or something, they can 20 months, barely 2 years, they can develop a completely new car from scratch. It's absurd compared to where we've been, previously. And everybody else is playing catch up. And I think that's the difficult thing, because, back when the Western car companies entered China and partnered up with the local OEMs, it was definitely we're the experts, you're the ones who are here to learn. It's quite a pill to swallow to realize that the boot is on the other foot. And many of the big players, like Volkswagen, for example, but again, not exclusively Volkswagen, are finding that the way forward is to partner with the other way round, partner with China, take on board Chinese technology, Chinese manufacturing processes in order to try and address the slide that they find themselves in. The need to produce good quality cars much quicker and at a much lower price with the sort of specification they would never have offered before. But, if they want to remain competitive with, the sort of brands we're seeing emerging in the market today. I mean, you look at, last month was a really good month in the UK. Car sales were, if I'm right, something like 11% up year on year, which is, great news. But a big part of that was the growth in the Chinese brands. And they are undoubtedly changing the market, aren't they? You're seeing offers out there in the marketplace, something like $299 down and $299 a month. The kind of deals, cars have been getting more expensive since the pandemic. They've been getting more expensive, haven't they? The monthly costs have been edging up, and suddenly the Chinese have come in, and you've got cars like, good cars too, JQ, Omoda and others. They're offering a full package for a very, very attractive price. And that's inevitably putting pressure on the established players to find a way to try and compete. I think from a consumer point of view, you always have to think of it that way, because in the end, we don't have a business without them. They're only going to see that as good news. I'm sure it's the same wherever you are. I happen to live these days in North Norfolk. This is one of those areas where having a car is not optional, really. That's a subject I'll talk about. Again, I did a piece for the local paper, the Eastern Daily Press. This is very Alan Partridge of me, but did a piece for the Eastern Daily Press about the effects of VED, vehicle excise duty, and how they disproportionately affect areas like this, because you can't make the choice not to have a car. I mean, I live in a really nice little market town, which is served by 2 buses a day, one into Norwich and one back. If you didn't have a car, you couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't, it's country roads between here and the next place. You can't walk them, not safely anyway. The point is, I'm seeing an awful lot of JQs, Omodas and other Chinese brands appearing on the roads around here. It's very much a 4x4 type of market here, but they're doing really, really, really well. And that's because they're giving something that the customers want, and others are going to have to step up to the plate and try and produce themselves. Going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. I was talking to a former colleague of mine recently and saying, do you remember? And which I know he did. I spent 15 years in the boardroom at BMW UK, which included periods where I was looking after Rover and Land Rover as well as BMW. Also, obviously, I was involved in and stayed involved in the launch of the Mini, and stayed involved with Mini. I had Mini responsibilities as well. And Rolls-Royce, I got involved with the launch of that too. In fact, I had an involvement very early on, which I'll talk about on another day, I think. But look, I remember when we used to be asked to prepare these ridiculous long-term plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans, which were nonsense then. But they're beyond nonsense today. I think, anybody who is looking to plan much beyond a 3-year window is probably wasting their time, because knowing exactly what's going to happen next year, or even less so the year after, is challenging enough. But casting out. I remember it was a massive exercise. I remember these huge spreadsheets that had all these plans on, and by model mix and model share and all the rest of it. Totally balmy, really, but it kept somebody in a job in Munich, I guess. That's the cynical view anyway, but it's true. It's going to be very interesting to see which brands are capable of the level of reinvention that is required to still be relevant on into the 2030s and beyond. I think some are showing signs of it already. I think some are struggling more. Others have kind of got things wrong a bit, but are going about getting it right. You look at, I think Renault are doing some good stuff, aren't they? Not exclusively Renault, but they're a good example to choose, having, developed some attractive EV products at sort of sensible prices in a what should be a big piece of the market. I mean, that's the thing when I talked about cars getting more expensive. We saw mass market cars like the Ford Fiesta disappearing, as if manufacturers are sort of saying, well, the cost of producing cars now today is so high, we can't produce a car like that economically. But that's the wrong answer, really, isn't it? You have to. You have to, because the Chinese sure as hell will. And then you're enabling them to take a massive slug of the market, probably in volume terms, the biggest segments of the market at that lower end. So I think people in boardrooms around the car industry are beginning to kind of go back to the drawing board. So it'll remain to be seen who it is that are the winners and who are the losers. And I watch with bated breath. Catch up with you soon.